Refusing to flinch, Clara kept her hands clamped over the paralyzed man's bleeding chest, completely ignoring the suppressed beretta pressed against her temple. Her would-be executioners thought they had the upper hand. What they failed to realize was that Boston's most ruthless crime lord was observing from the shadows, and the sight was about to bring him to his knees. Room 412 at the St. Jude's private annex in Boston was where the ultra-wealthy buried their mistakes. It was an elite, discreet neurological rehabilitation wing, tucked away from the prying eyes of the public. The floors were polished marble, the machines were state-of-the-art, and the silence was suffocating. For 8 months, Clara Hayes had been the primary charge nurse for a patient registered only as Arthur Reed. Arthur was a ghost. At 32 years old, he possessed the chiseled jawline of a Greek statue and the athletic build of a heavyweight fighter, but he was a prisoner inside his own body. A catastrophic spinal cord injury at the C4 vertebrae, coupled with severe cranial trauma, had left him entirely paralyzed. He was locked in. He couldn't speak, couldn't move, and relied on a silent ventilator to breathe. According to the hospital registry, he was the victim of a devastating hit-and-run on the interstate. Clara, a 28-year-old nurse who had clawed her way through nursing school by working graveyard shifts, knew a lie when she saw one. The scars on Arthur's torso weren't from a steering wheel. They were the unmistakable puckered exit wounds of high-caliber bullets. But at St. Jude's, nurses were paid handsomely to look at the machines, not the history. "You're talking to him again, Hayes," Dr. Harrison Gable sighed, leaning against the doorframe of room 412. He was the chief of neurology, a man whose expensive Rolex was funded by the tragedies of the elite. "He cannot hear you. He has minimal brainstem reflexes. It's an empty house." "He's in there, Dr. Gable," Clara said quietly, not looking up as she carefully adjusted Arthur's IV line. She checked his pupils with a penlight. His heart rate elevates when I read to him. His pupils dilate when the lights change. He tracks movement. It's subtle, but it's not arbitrary. "It's autonomic, Clara. It's involuntary," Gable dismissed, checking his clipboard. His expression hardened. "And frankly, it doesn't matter anymore. His time here is up." Clara froze, the plastic tubing slipping from her fingers. "What do you mean?" "The anonymous trust that has been wiring $10,000 a day for his care, it dried up. The accounts were frozen last week by federal authorities. The shell company paying the bills no longer exists," Gable explained, entirely devoid of empathy. "The board had a meeting this morning. We are transferring Mr. Reed to County General on Friday." Clara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. County General was a severely underfunded state facility. For a ventilator-dependent tetraplegic requiring round-the-clock suctioning and repositioning, sending him there was a death sentence. He would contract pneumonia or sepsis within a month and die completely alone. "You can't do that," Clara argued, her voice rising. "He's medically fragile. He needs specialized care. If you send him to county, he'll die." "Then he dies, Clara," Gable snapped. "This is a hospital, not a charity. Prep him for the transfer." When Gable left, the room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Clara looked down at Arthur. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. She stepped closer, leaning over the bed rails. "I won't let them take you," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "Do you hear me? I know you're in there. I know you're fighting. And I am not going to let them throw you away." She watched his face. Slowly, agonizingly, Arthur's right eyelid fluttered. A single tear escaped the corner of his eye, tracing a wet path down his temple. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She wiped the tear away with her thumb, her heart pounding. She had grown up in the foster system. She knew what it felt like to be abandoned, to be written off as a lost cause. She had sworn an oath to protect her patients, but with Arthur, it had become intensely personal. For the next 3 days, Clara practically lived at St. Jude's. She worked off the clock, taking double shifts, refusing to leave Arthur's side. She fought with hospital administration, threatening to go to the medical ethics board. She slept in the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside his bed, holding his limp hand, reading to him, from worn paperbacks to keep his mind anchored to the world. She didn't know that Arthur Reed wasn't just a victim of a hit and run. She didn't know his real name was Dante Falcone. And she certainly didn't know that the reason his funds had dried up was because his older brother, Gabriel Falcone, the ruthless head of the New England Cosa Nostra, had been ambushed in Palermo, completely cut off from his network in a bloody 2-year mafia war. Dante had been Gabriel's enforcer, the man who took 3 bullets to the spine to shield his brother from an assassin's ambush. Gabriel had hidden Dante at St. Jude's to keep him safe from rival families while he tore the underworld apart, looking for the traitors. Now, Gabriel's enemies had finally found out where the crippled Falcone brother was hiding, and they were coming to finish the job. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Thursday. A torrential downpour battered the reinforced windows of the 4th floor. Clara was at the nurse's station, rubbing her exhausted eyes and nursing a lukewarm cup of black coffee. The ward was operating on skeleton staff, just her, an orderly named David, and a sleeping receptionist down the hall. The elevator pinged. Clara looked up. 2 men stepped off. They were dressed in the standard navy blue scrubs of the St. Jude's night staff, complete with stethoscopes draped around their necks and ID badges clipped to their chest pockets. But something immediately felt wrong. Clara had the hyper-vigilant instincts of a woman who had grown up in tough neighborhoods. These men didn't walk like exhausted medical staff. They walked with predatory grace. Their shoulders were tense, their eyes sweeping the corridor, assessing exits and camera blind spots. "Can I help you?" Clara asked, stepping out from behind the desk. The taller of the 2 men offered a polite, synthetic smile. He had a thick Eastern European accent. "We are here for the transfer in room 412. Dr. Gable requested an early transport." Clara's blood ran cold. "Dr. Gable is asleep at home. There are no transfers scheduled at 2 in the morning, especially not for a critical vent patient." "There has been a change of plans," the second man said, his voice a low gravel. He bypassed the desk, heading straight down the hall toward Arthur's room. Clara's eyes darted to the man's hands. He wasn't carrying a transport clipboard or a portable oxygen tank. He was holding a pre-filled syringe. The liquid inside was crystal clear, but the label taped to the plastic barrel caught the fluorescent light. Potassium chloride. Injected directly into an IV, that dosage would cause a massive, untraceable heart attack in seconds. "Hey!" Clara shouted, her heart hammering against her ribs. She sprinted down the hall, cutting off the second man just as he reached the door to room 412. She slammed her back against the heavy oak door, spreading her arms. "You are not going in there." The tall man sighed, dropping the polite facade. "Nurse, move away from the door. You do not want to be a hero today." "I'm calling security," Clara warned, her hand reaching blindly behind her for the emergency panic button on the wall. Before her fingers could brush the plastic, the second man lunged. He grabbed Clara by the throat, his grip like a steel vice, and slammed her brutally into the drywall. The air rushed from her lungs in a pained gasp. The coffee cup shattered on the floor, spilling brown liquid across the pristine white tiles. "Open the door," the man holding her choked out, nodding to his partner. Clara's vision swam with black spots, but pure, unadulterated adrenaline flooded her veins. She was not going to let Arthur die in the dark. As the man holding her loosened his grip slightly to reach for the doorknob, Clara drove her knee upward with every ounce of strength she possessed, catching him directly in the groin. The man groaned, doubling over. Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall mount next to her and swung it in a vicious arc. The red steel connected with the tall man's temple with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the floor, dropping the lethal syringe. The man she had kneed roared in anger. He pulled a suppressed pistol from the waistband of his scrubs, the cold steel gleaming under the clinical lights. Clara scrambled backward into room 412, slamming the heavy door shut and throwing her weight against it. She frantically twisted the deadbolt just as a muffled thwip sounded from the hallway, and a bullet splintered through the thick oak, missing her shoulder by inches. "Arthur!" Clara screamed, diving behind the reinforced steel of his medical bed as another bullet tore through the door. Arthur's eyes were wide. The heart monitor beside him was screaming, his heart rate skyrocketing to 160 beats per minute. He knew exactly what was happening. He was a mafia enforcer trapped in a broken body, unable to protect the woman who was bleeding for him. His chest heaved against the ventilator, his eyes locked onto Clara with absolute, agonizing desperation. "I've got you," Clara panted, blood dripping from a cut on her forehead where she had hit the wall. "I'm not leaving you." The door groaned as the assassin on the other side kicked it. Wood splintered. The deadbolt was giving way. Clara looked around wildly for a weapon. She ripped open the emergency tracheotomy kit on the bedside table, wrapping her trembling fingers around a number 10 surgical scalpel. It was a pathetic weapon against a firearm, but she positioned herself directly over Arthur's body, using herself as a human shield. Crash! The door burst open. The assassin stepped into the room, his face twisted in rage, the gun raised and pointed directly at Clara's chest. "Stupid girl," he spat, stepping over the threshold. Clara gripped the scalpel, her breath ragged. She braced for the blinding pain of a gunshot. She looked down at Arthur, offering him one last, fiercely protective look. But the gunshot never came. Instead, a massive, shadowed figure materialized in the doorway behind the assassin. Before the gunman could pull the trigger, a hand encased in a black leather glove clamped over his face. A sickening snap echoed through the room as the assassin's neck was broken with terrifying, effortless precision. The man collapsed like a ragdoll. Standing in the doorway, soaked in the freezing Boston rain, was Gabriel Falcone. He was breathing heavily, his bespoke charcoal suit ruined by blood and water. In his right hand, he held a custom 1911 pistol. Behind him, the hallway was filled with half a dozen heavily armed men in dark suits, securing the floor. Gabriel's dark, hollow eyes swept the room. They bypassed the dead assassin on the floor and locked instantly onto the bed. He saw his brother, Dante, alive and unharmed. Then Gabriel looked at Clara. He saw the splintered door. He saw the shattered syringe on the floor outside. He saw this tiny, bruised, exhausted civilian nurse standing over the heir to the Falcone empire, holding a 3-inch surgical blade, ready to die to protect a man she thought was nothing more than a forgotten charity case. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the mechanical hiss of the ventilator. Gabriel Falcone, a man who had brought entire cities to their knees, lowered his weapon. He took a slow step into the room, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. He didn't see a nurse. He saw a guardian angel covered in blood. The smell of ozone, cordite, and copper blood hung thick in the sterile air of room 412. Clara stood trembling over Dante's bed, the bloody surgical scalpel still gripped tightly in her white-knuckled hand. Her chest heaved. She expected the imposing men in the hallway to raise their weapons, to silence the only witness to this carnage. Instead, Gabriel Falcone slowly holstered his custom 1911. He raised both hands, palms open, in a universal gesture of peace. "Drop the blade, little bird," Gabriel said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone, rough like crushed gravel, yet surprisingly gentle. "The danger has passed. You have my word." Clara's eyes darted from the dead assassin on the floor to the terrifying man in the ruined charcoal suit. She didn't drop the weapon. "Who are you? What is this?" "My name is Gabriel," he answered, stepping fully into the room. He ignored the blood pooling around his expensive Italian leather shoes. "And the man you are shielding with your life is my younger brother, Dante." Clara glanced down at Arthur. Dante. The frantic beeping of the heart monitor had begun to slow, settling into a steady, rhythmic pace. Dante's eyes were locked onto his brother, a silent, powerful communication passing between the two men. Relief, grief, and unyielding loyalty all conveyed without a single spoken word. Gabriel walked to the side of the medical bed. The sheer size of him dwarfed the machinery. He reached out with a trembling, leather-clad hand and gently rested it against Dante's cheek. "I'm sorry it took me so long, Fratello," Gabriel whispered, his ruthless facade cracking for a fraction of a second. "The rats hid well, but I burned their nests to the ground. You are safe now." Dante blinked twice. A tear slipped into his dark hair. Gabriel took a deep, shuddering breath and turned back to Clara. He looked at her bruised neck, the cut on her forehead, and the fierce, protective stance she still maintained. The men in the hallway, hardened enforcers of the Falcone syndicate, watched in stunned silence as Gabriel Falcone, the undisputed king of the New England underworld, took a step back and did the unthinkable. He dropped to one knee, lowering his head until his chin touched his chest. He bowed to her. It wasn't a mere nod of thanks. It was a profound, archaic gesture of total submission and eternal gratitude. In the Mafia, a don bows to absolutely no one. But in this sterile hospital room, Gabriel surrendered his pride to a 28-year-old nurse. "You did not know him," Gabriel spoke, his head still bowed. "You owed him nothing. The doctors abandoned him. The hospital sold him out. Yet you stood between a loaded gun and a crippled man with a 3-inch piece of metal. You saved my blood, Clara Hayes. From this night until the end of my days, my life, my wealth, and my army belong to you." Clara finally dropped the scalpel. It clattered against the linoleum. Her knees buckled as the adrenaline rapidly evaporated, leaving her shaking violently. Before she could hit the floor, Gabriel was on his feet, catching her by the shoulders and easing her into the vinyl visitor's chair. "Water!" Gabriel snapped over his shoulder. Instantly, one of the armed men vanished, returning seconds later with a plastic cup. As Clara drank, trying to steady her breathing, the hallway elevator chimed again. 2 more men in dark suits dragged a figure out of the cab. It was Dr. Harrison Gable. The chief of neurology was wearing silk pajamas, drenched in rain, and sobbing hysterically. They threw Gable into the hallway, just outside room 412. "Please, Mr. Falcone," I didn't have a choice, Gable begged, crawling on his hands and knees. The Chicago outfit, the Russo family. They found out about the offshore accounts. They threatened my wife. They told me to cut his funding and arrange the transfer to County General so they could intercept the ambulance. I swear to God. Gabriel's demeanor instantly shifted from reverent gratitude to absolute freezing terror. He stepped out of the room, looking down at the groveling doctor. You took an oath to protect human life, Dr. Gable, Gabriel said quietly, adjusting his cuffs. I paid you $10,000 a day to ensure my brother received the finest care on the eastern seaboard. Instead, you took Russo money, labeled my brother a lost cause, and scheduled his execution. I was trying to survive, Gable wept. Clara stood up, walking to the doorway. She looked at the man who had patronized her, who had been willing to throw a human being away like garbage. You told me he was an empty house, Clara said, her voice shaking with disgust. You told me he couldn't feel anything. Gabriel looked at Clara. What do you want me to do with him, Clara? The question hung in the air. The boss of the Falcone family was genuinely deferring to her judgment. Clara looked at the terrified doctor, then back at Dante, who was watching her with fierce, intelligent eyes. I am a nurse, Clara said firmly. I save lives. I don't take them. I don't want his blood on my conscience. But I want his medical license revoked. I want him investigated by the Federal Medical Board. I want him ruined, and I want him away from my patient. Gabriel's lips curved into a cold, predatory smile. You are far more merciful than I am, little bird. But your word is law. He looked at his men. Take attorney Richard Kensington off retainer and put him on this. Drain Gable's bank accounts, seize his properties, and hand all his Russo communications over to the FBI. Make sure he spends the rest of his miserable life working in a prison laundry room. The men dragged the sobbing doctor away. Gabriel turned back to the room. Pack his things, Clara. We are leaving St. Jude's. He can't just leave, Clara panicked, her medical training overriding her fear. He needs a mechanical ventilator, a feeding tube, specialized suctioning. I have purchased a private estate in Beacon Hill, Gabriel interrupted gently. I have flown in a surgical team from Geneva. The estate is equipped with a state-of-the-art trauma ICU. But my brother refuses to be touched by anyone he does not trust. Gabriel looked her dead in the eye. He trusts you. Will you come with us? Clara looked at Dante. He couldn't speak, but his dark, desperate eyes pleaded with her. Please. She didn't have a family. She didn't have anything tying her to this miserable, corrupt hospital. She had fought for him when he was a ghost, and she wasn't going to abandon him now that he was a man. Let me get his transport monitor, Clara said. The Falcone estate in Beacon Hill was a fortress disguised as a historic mansion. The entire East Wing had been retrofitted into a brilliant, sunlit medical facility. For the next 6 months, Clara's life became intrinsically tied to Dante Falcone. Gabriel had spared no expense, flying in Dr. William Aris, one of the world's foremost neurosurgeons. And it was Dr. Aris who uncovered the most sickening twist of all. His spinal cord was never fully severed, Dr. Aris explained to Clara and Gabriel one evening, reviewing Dante's new MRI scans. It was severely bruised, yes, a massive contusion at the C4 level. But the reason he was completely locked in for 8 months wasn't just the trauma. Dr. Gable was secretly administering microdoses of vecuronium, a paralytic agent, mixed into his daily saline drip. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. He was keeping him paralyzed. Exactly. Dr. Aris nodded grimly. Gable kept Dante chemically locked down to ensure he appeared completely hopeless. It justified the exorbitant daily fees, prevented Dante from ever communicating his true identity, and made him an easy target for the Russos. With the toxins finally flushed from his system and aggressive physical therapy, the paralysis is not permanent. When Clara broke the news to Dante, he wept. For the first time in almost a year, hope broke through the suffocating darkness of his trauma. The rehabilitation was brutal. It was hours of excruciating physical therapy, electrical muscle stimulation, and hydrotherapy. But Clara never left his side. She was his anchor. When Dante wanted to quit, when the pain of his waking nerves made him scream silently into his ventilator, Clara was there, wiping his brow, holding his hand, and reminding him of the man he was fighting to become. Slowly, the ghost faded, and the man emerged. By month 3, Dante was successfully weaned off the ventilator. His vocal cords, atrophied from disuse, were weak, but he could breathe on his own. By month 5, he regained motor control of his upper body. The heavy, muscular frame that had withered away began to return, and through it all, a quiet, profound romance blossomed between them. It wasn't born of mafia glamour or dark seduction. It was forged in the fire of survival. It was found in the quiet moments at 3 a.m., when Clara would read to him, and he would gently stroke her hair with a trembling, recovering hand. Dante looked at Clara not as an employee, but as his savior. She was the light that had pierced his living hell. It happened on a Tuesday in late October. The autumn leaves were turning a brilliant shade of gold outside the estate windows. Clara was standing by the window, organizing his daily medication schedule, her back turned to him. "Clara." The voice was raspy, broken, and rough from a year of silence, but it was undeniably masculine. Clara gasped, dropping the pillbox. She spun around. Dante was sitting up in his bed, unsupported. The feeding tubes were gone. The ventilator was gone. His dark hair was swept back, and his piercing hazel eyes were locked entirely on her. He reached out his hand, the muscles in his arm shaking with the effort, but his palm remained steady. "You." Dante swallowed hard, tears pooling in his eyes. "You stayed." Clara ran to the bed, collapsing to her knees beside it. She took his large, warm hand and pressed it to her cheek, sobbing uncontrollably. "I told you I wouldn't let them throw you away." Dante leaned forward, his strength returning by the second. He cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "In the dark, when I was trapped, your voice was the only thing that kept me from going insane," he whispered fiercely. "You are my heart, Clara. You are my soul. I swear on my life, you will never be alone again." He leaned down and kissed her. It was a kiss of utter desperation, of a man tasting oxygen after drowning for a year. Clara kissed him back, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders, feeling the powerful, steady beat of his heart against her chest. When Gabriel walked into the room a few minutes later, holding a stack of legal documents, he stopped dead in his tracks. He watched his brother holding the nurse who had saved his life. Gabriel quietly backed out of the room, a rare, genuine smile crossing the Mafia Boss's face, gently pulling the heavy mahogany door shut behind him. A year later, the Boston underworld had changed. The Russo family had been decimated, and Gabriel's reign was absolute and uncontested. But the biggest change wasn't on the streets. It was within the Falcone family itself. The grand ballroom of the Beacon Hill estate was filled with the city's elite, loyal family capos and politicians who knew better than to cross Gabriel Falcone. It was a celebration of life. Standing at the top of the grand staircase, looking breathtaking in a custom silk gown, was Clara. And standing beside her, leaning heavily on a silver-handled cane, but standing under his own incredible willpower, was Dante. He was no longer Arthur Reed, the paralyzed ghost of room 412. He was Dante Falcone, the formidable underboss of the most powerful syndicate on the coast. But as the crowd applauded, Dante didn't look at his men, and he didn't look at the wealth surrounding him. He looked only at the woman holding his arm. Clara had walked into a hospital room to save a broken patient. She had ended up saving a king, and in return, he had given her an empire. Did this incredible story of loyalty, survival, and unexpected romance keep you on the edge of your seat? True strength isn't just physical, it's the courage to stand up for the vulnerable when no one else will. If Clara and Dante's journey touched your heart, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a dramatic twist, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life inspired stories. Your support means everything.